And welcome to Theatre in the Apocalypse, where we discuss what the arts and theatre might look like when the world ends, or at least when it's close to it, which seems to be what it is now. All right. Let me start with the introduction of our guest today. Welcome, Ruwanthie De Chickera, who's a playwright, a screenwriter, and theatre director. She has a strong belief in the practice, politics, and philosophy of devising, a theatre approach of collective creativity and leadership that challenges existing structures of authorship, power sharing, and change. Ruwanthie is an Eisenhower Fellow. Her award-winning film, Machan, has been screened in over 50 countries. She is the artistic director of Stages Theatre Group, a bilingual ensemble theatre company that produces socially and politically conscious original Sri Lankan theatre. Ruwanthie works internationally with British visual artist David Cottrell, with whom she co-founded Empathy and Risk, an artist-led initiative that addresses systematic failure in contemporary global conflicts, which I suppose means you have no shortage of material right now.
Yeah, never actually.
Never, yes. So welcome, Ruwanthie. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
how have you been?
So is that today, 10 minutes before, or the last 4 months?
Let's go with, for the start, the last 4 months. All of us have taken to lockdown a bit differently. I believe Tracy, for example, she developed a sudden obsession for gardening and houseplants that lasted about as long as the houseplants did. So how has it affected you?
Well, it started off rather badly for me because I had just returned from overseas and there was a kind of a self-imposed isolation. So I was completely by myself. My children were also not with me. And then it was supposed to be 2 weeks, but I began to feel a bit unwell. So then I took the precaution of extending it for much longer. So it was 6 weeks of complete isolation by myself in my flat. I didn't meet anyone for 6 weeks. So that was my sort of the way I was broken into the whole lockdown, really extreme. I didn't meet a soul. People would come and sort of drop food off at my doorway and run away because nobody knew what this was. Nobody knew if I had the virus. I was in touch with doctors. I was fine, but I was just sort of taking precautions. So it was quite an intense entrance into this whole thing. I did it by myself. And I think that really made me sort of grasp the bull by the horns, you know. Had to sit with myself for long hours. Discovered that I wasn't such a nice person, quite boring to spend my entire time with. And yeah, that was how it all started. And when the kids came back, it was a whole different set of challenges, from online schooling, you know, to everything else. And as an artist, I've really tried to use this time. I mean, I started off, I think, like everybody else, telling myself, I'm going to learn a language, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to, you know, start gardening or whatever on my balcony. So none of the above happened. And then I started really thinking about the need to produce something immediately. And I started sort of grappling with that. It was hugely compounded by the crazy flow of information, you know, people jumping to conclusions about or having theories about what this meant, you know, so much instant information available on what was going on, what was the meaning of what was going on. And I decided that what I was going to do is I was going to hold back and I was not going to produce anything, but I was going to watch and I was going to record my impressions and I was going to wait until I even began to understand what was happening. And yeah, that is basically how I've sort of entered the lockdown.
Can I ask you, this compulsion to create something, where do you think that comes from? Is it because you felt the need to fill the space, or is it because you just always need to create something?
I think as an artist, obviously, there's always a kind of a interpretation that's happening. There's the outside world, and then there's what you make of it, and then your whatever creative outlet. So it could be a creative outlet that is public, or it could be just your own processing of what's happening. So that goes on, and that should go on. I think what I'm struggling with it now is the speed or the pressure to produce things quickly. And I think that is very much a kind of a characteristic of this day and age. The speed with which things are being produced, it's mind-boggling. The variety of information, the depth of it, and the speed of it. So in a way, you get up and you every morning and you open your Twitter feed, or it's all social media. But that's how we're all communicating. But there's a sort of barrage of opinions, of analysis, stories, all of that, and some of it really good, some of it not so good. But just the volume of it makes you then begin to question yourself as an artist, saying, okay, so I'm an artist, and up to now I haven't said anything. So dare I call myself an artist? Because everybody else, some people who don't even call themselves artists, children, they have something to say about this. And it's not just the quantity of material. Some of it is also, because the quantity, it's the quality of material. Some of it is really very, very good. So then you begin to feel a bit insecure. Should I be saying something? And for me, that's quite it's not a very strong place from which to create, because it's from a position of insecurity, and you feel that you're under pressure to say something. So I was consciously fighting this. I don't know if it was the right decision, but I have been consciously fighting. It doesn't mean I'm not processing. It doesn't mean I'm not taking notes, listening, talking, writing. But at the moment, it's all for myself. And I just want to wait a bit.
Yeah, so I suppose with the access to technology and instant publishing capability, you feel a need to react to everything and probably express yourself every single time. And that is not necessarily a good thing for an artist. You need some contemplation.
I think for me, at this moment, I don't think it's good, because what I am trying to do, what this lockdown forced me to do, and I'm sure it forced many people to do this, but I kind of really embrace this, as I'm really trying to slow down, and I'm trying to return to some of the skills and the capacities that I now recognize I've lost along the way. And I completely blame sort of dependence on social media, technology, this kind of the processing of sort of quick bites of information all the time. The constant distraction of the phone, wanting to know exactly what's happening, when it happens, having all of these devices, not wanting to be left out of the most current kind of trending topic of conversation, be it local or global or whatever. So that kind of gets you into a spin. At least it gets me into a spin. I know there are people who are in their element. They really coast this kind of situation, But for me, I've recognized that it's not my strength to be constantly hopping from one thing to another. And I've now recognized that it's become a bit of a habit, and I'm actively really trying to push back against that. And I'm starting with reading again, like proper reading. I used to be an immersive, avid reader. When I was a child, I'd read a book a day. I can't, as an adult now, I can't get through a couple of chapters of a book without feeling the need to, move on to something else or even something in addition to that. So I'm reading like 3 or 4 books at the same time and dipping in and dipping out. So it's like something in the hardwire in your brain has changed, and I'm not saying it's bad. All I'm saying is I like to think that it's not good for me, because I remember as a writer producing, like being really obsessed with a topic, and not eating, sleeping, speaking to anyone, just completely immersed in a world when I was writing. And I'm a little worried that I may have lost that capacity now, and it's much more kind of a multitasking brain that I've developed over the last years. So for me as an artist, I think the biggest challenge of the lockdown has been, or the biggest opportunity of the lockdown has been to first recognize that these changes have happened within me, and then begin to reclaim some of the things that I believe I had and have now lost.
Right. So you said you had lost some skills over time that you wanted to reclaim. I'm presuming that writing is one of them. What other skills do you feel that you have?
It's not right. I mean, I still write, but it's just the type of writing and the intensity and the immersion in the writing. So I'm writing smaller pieces, but it's been a while since I've written either a full-length film or I've never really undertaken a book, but I'm thinking maybe I should look at that, or even a full-length play. And that's just, it's a completely different frame of mind to do that kind of writing for me. So I'm still writing, and I don't think I've lost the skill entirely, but it's small chunks, little kind of, it's like it's like, tiny little poems, like haikus or something like that. It's not the real, the longer pieces. I just like to know that I can do both.
Yeah.
That's all.
Are there any other skills like that you've identified that you need to reclaim, perhaps?
Sitting still.
Right.
Yeah, and being okay with not having anything to do. I mean, it's something that I tell my kids all the time, not to be afraid of boredom, to sit, to look out, to just be. I think that's, if I'm to be honest with myself, that's something that I struggle with. I at least want to watch a movie.
Yeah.
Because I feel I'm wasting time otherwise,
Correct.
And I think that's not all that healthy. Other skills, maybe the skill to stay with something over an extended period of time. That also, I feel, is kind of, I'm losing that capacity. So all of these things I'm trying to regain my abilities to do that.
It's quite incredible the kind of opportunity that even some crisis like this can present, how it forces us to just sit with our thoughts and just reevaluate every single thing, isn't it? So I just want to take you a step back to what you were doing before the lockdown started. Could you tell us a little bit about that project?
Oh, yes. So when I was with Tracy and a couple of the artists of Mind Adventures, Tehani Chitti and Tracy Jayasinghe. And Tracy Holsinger was leading this team of Sri Lankan artists who had traveled to Pakistan. We were in Karachi, and we were there for a very intense kind of workshop, rehearsal, performance kind of sort of undertaking. Tracy and I started collaborating on this theatre research project some years back called the Dear Children Sincerely project. It was a project that was initiated by Stages Theatre Group, which is the theatre company that I'm artistic director of. But since Tracy and I have always, been sort of soul sisters and, always tried to find ways to collaborate, when she heard about the project, she came up with this wonderful idea about this idea of creating monologues out of this project. Now, this project looks to interview the generation born in the 1930s in Sri Lanka in order to understand how this generation, who would have been alive and have living memories of independence, to understand how this generation experienced and saw the trajectory of modern Sri Lanka's history from 48 onwards. And looking back, what do they consider important? Or even more than that, what do they consider were their mistakes? And before they leave, trying to get a sense of what they want to leave with us in terms of knowledge, insight. So it's this really beautiful project where we interview people of this generation. And Tracy had this idea very early on in the project where she said, Ru, I'd like to take the material, the interview material, and I'd like you to write monologues out of them. So stick to the actual voice of the person as much as possible. And she really tried to do something ultra realistic, naturalistic with the material. And I think she created some beautiful pieces. So now this has been happening for the last 2 or 3 years. This project sort of goes on because the more people we interview, more material comes up, we create new pieces whenever we can. A few months back, Tracy comes to me with this idea that she'd like to expand this project into the region, and she's made some connections with Pakistan and Indian artists. And out of this came this idea that Sri Lankan and Pakistani artists will collaborate in merging these monologues together in a play. So we had about 6 monologues from Sri Lanka, and we sourced 1 more monologue from Pakistan. We had Pakistani actors and we had Sri Lankan actors. And for about 2 weeks before the lockdown actually happened, Tracy, myself, a couple of artists from Sri Lanka and a few artists from Pakistan were working really intensely in Karachi, trying to create this performance called Dear Children Sincerely Remembrance Day. Perform at this festival, and I think even more important than that single performance was the relationship it was going to build with the Pakistani artists there, in the hope that we might then take the DCS project to Pakistan, maybe to Bangladesh and India, and we kind of do a regional analysis or a project looking at this generation. And if you look at this generation across the region, they are the generation that lived through partition. So I mean, whatever happened in Sri Lanka was huge, but what happened in the in the Indian subcontinent it was phenomenal. Partition, the creation of 3 countries over a short space of time and through such violence. So trying to get the memories of that generation before that knowledge, that experience is lost. And so that was an attempt to do that. But I mean, we were really close to performing, and then COVID happened, and the Pakistan government closed down all public performances, and we were worried that we'd be stuck in Karachi without being able to come back. We hopped on a plane, changed our flights, came back, and like the next day the airports closed.
Right. Working with a group from Pakistan, I mean, there are some obvious cultural differences. Did this create complications when you were trying to work together to create one piece of work, or it doesn't really matter?
Really?
Not
I
really.
mean, to be honest, I was playing the role of the writer, which is such a lovely role to play in rehearsals, because you get to sit in the corner and look moody and, dissatisfied with rehearsals, and everybody's nice to you because they want you to write them the nice lines.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, Trace was handling the whole thing marvelously. By the time I went in a bit late. She was already working with these two casts. By the time I got there, they were working like an ensemble. I don't know how she did it, but they were so, they were working really well together, the Sri Lankan and Pakistani artists. And we moved very, very fast into creating the play.
So was there a sort of shared experience of colonization, colonialism between the two countries? Was it somewhat similar?
I think Sri Lanka's experience has been vastly different from India.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Pakistan and Bangladesh came after the end of colonization. So, I think it's more departures, because even in the DCS project, when we interviewed the generation about their memories of colonization here, they remember it to be such a kind of a gentle kind of transition. It was like a gift,
Right.
People were not even sure, they were not even unanimous that they wanted, independence. But the Sri Lankans had huge admiration for the sort of the fight of Gandhi and Nehru in India and the people's movement, and so we watched this according to this generation's records and interviews. They sort of watched here, from here they watched this massive struggle there, but they were happy to be granted independence rather than really fight for it, and possibly we got it because of the fight that was that was done there. But I mean, of course, the independence that was given to India and then Pakistan, the way Pakistan and India sort of burst into being, with independence, with partition, it's horrible. There was such violence, such atrocity, and then Bangladesh as well, So one thing that struck me really, if I can say this, is we interviewed one person with his memories on partition and the creation of first of Bangladesh, and then first the creation of Pakistan and then the creation of Bangladesh, etc. And when we interviewed him, when we wrote the script, and when we performed this, his story was so amazing. As a young boy, at the age of 16, he was sent from India first to Bangladesh, and from Bangladesh to Pakistan, in search of a country. His family is split over these three countries. They can't visit each other, just really difficult, a kind of a history, and if you think of a little boy going through all of this, not being able to visit his father when he died, all of that, because the countries were, warring. What struck me is when we performed this to a very small audience in Pakistan, because it was just a reading there, I expected a kind of a big response to the Pakistani monologue. But the people in the audience, there wasn't a huge amount of them, but the general consensus was, yeah, you know what, that happened to my family as well. Or something much worse happened to my family. My grandfather got stuck, in Bangladesh, could never return home to see, So it was just this sort of the widespread, the widespreadness of the whole experience, the fact that probably every family in the subcontinent has a very tragic memory of this. So I think that really struck me about the violence of the independence kind of struggle partition and the birth of those three countries, as opposed to the relative ease with which Sri Lanka, came to being.
Even with the relative ease at which Sri Lanka came to being, do you think colonialism is still really entrenched in our culture right now? And does it affect our theatre or our art?
Well, it's kind of two questions. So, is it entrenched in our is it entrenched in our culture? I mean, there's the kind of the popular culture, and then there's arts. So, what I don't know, it's a question about the culture by our choice, our lifestyle choices. Or are we talking about arts?
Okay, let's leave the lifestyle choices apart. That might be obvious.
Okay.
Let's focus on the art alone.
Okay.
And mainly theatre, perhaps.
I think 20 years back, there was quite a distinct kind of separation between English Sinhala and Tamil theatre in Sri Lanka. And I'm quite proud to say that I think I belong to a group of artists like Tracy, like Feroz, a few people of sort of that age group that really tried to change this. I remember when we started, when Stages Theatre Group, which is, by the way, starting 20 years this year, yeah. So 20 years back, when we started doing serious original theatre in English and serious political original theatre in English, we were told nobody's going to come watch your plays because English theatre it has to be either comedy or it has to be musicals. But there were several of us sort of unpicking this in different ways. And with Stages, we were really insistent on going. We said, no, we're going to go with serious, original English theatre, and that's how we started. And when we started and we started producing the plays, it was all we were drawing really big audiences. So this whole thing about nobody will come to watch your plays was nonsense, right? And of course, other things were happening also. Tracy was producing stuff, Feroz was producing stuff, So incrementally, the landscape began to change. Subsequently, maybe about 10 years down the line, another really important change happened which a very positive change, which is that not only did we have, English theatre also taking on serious political, socially sort of pertinent issues, but we also had artists mixing their languages in which they worked, and audiences then beginning to move from one language theatre to the other. And now, if you look at most of the theatre companies, they're largely, I think, bilingual, or at least people are comfortable working with people who work predominantly in another language. Of course, within this, the theatre that suffered the most was the Tamil theatre, and that we haven't seen a revival of that because Tamil theatre came under huge assault because it was directly impacted by the war, and we still haven't seen them recover from that. And that's huge. That's our loss, actually, as a country. Mm-hmm. That we haven't been able to provide the space, the infrastructure, the opportunity, and the safety for Tamil artists to be as vocal, to be as engaged as artists in the Sinhala and English language theatres. Right. Of course, individuals are breaking it, but but you'll always get the individuals leading the way. But I'm talking about, as a force. Mm-hmm. As a force, it's still lacking.
Was this the reason why in 2014, when you did Walking Path, you did it without words at all to make it more accessible?
Walking
Was it?
Path.
Yeah.
Well, you have to if you go back to 2014, I think most of us who are sensible enough to remember what the post-war period was like, 2009 onwards, and it ended in 2014. I think we'll remember it to be a time where there was real fear about saying, there was no freedom of expression. We had journalists who were being murdered, who were being disappeared forcibly, and it was a real time of censorship from the state, official and unofficial, and a corresponding self-censorship, paranoia from citizens.
Right.
So within this context, we had to find ways in which to say what we wanted to say as artists. So the creation of Walking Path, which is the title of it is Walking Path, a play without words. Walking Path, a play without words was not to bridge the language gap. Walking Path, a play without words was to bridge the enforced censorship problem that we had. The fact that we couldn't say what we all knew, we couldn't name who we needed to name. It was a time of fear and real fear. So people had to find ways around this. And what our theatre company did is we did the Walking Path play is a play about the gentrification of Colombo, which happened immediately after the war. And we really unpacked this. The military in the parks, the kind of the crazy policing of behavior, the cleanup, the urban sort of housing being sort of smashed, all of that was happening, and it was happening so fast. The sort of disenfranchisement of citizens, who'd sort of get up and see that, a building that was there is no longer there, something else is being put up. It's being put up so fast, you have no doubt about who's actually putting the buildings up, and the fear to speak out against this. So why we created a play without words was because if there was no way we could have said what we wanted to say and got it past the censor board, because we were deeply critical of all of this that was going on, the militarization, the beautification, the gentrification, the displacement, the erasing of memory, all of these things that were happening. So we chose to do a play without words. But in order to circumvent a kind of a problem we had, but ultimately it worked because in not using words, the play was hugely popular. People immediately understood. There was such a bond with the audience because saying nothing, everybody in the audience understood what was being said because there was a kind of a unspoken, tacit understanding of what we were all in, and our acknowledgement that we couldn't speak out against this. And that was what bound us together at that moment.
Understood. Usually we'd leave the questions for the end, but there's a question that's come in that I think would fit in really well right now. So I'll just toss it at you. I think it's from Professor Saumya Lianage. So
Hi,
he says, he says that, it's on screen. Dear Ruwa, so happy to see you after a long time, at least virtually. You're one of the few people who have been struggling to develop Sri Lankan theatre that bridges the gap between Sinhala, Tamil and English theatres. What do you think about the future of such collaborations amidst pandemic and other non-medical oppressions?
So our theatre company Stages took a conscious decision a few years, about 10 years back, to reimagine ourselves as a bilingual theatre company. And this was it was a political decision. It was a kind of a very conscious decision we took. it has really worked to our benefit. I've seen artists, I've seen the range of topics that we can cover expand. I've seen the strength in the theatre company grow because of the networks that we bring to each other, the skill set, the way we can complement each other. And also, what I've understood is because we're artists, if an artist is creating something in one language, let's say they're reasonably kind of skilled. But if you actually push an artist to create something in 2 languages, in 3 languages, not just to translate, but to actually actively engage in the act of creation, which means to engage in the act of creative research, all of that, there's a huge expansion that happens to the artist's imagination, capacity, sensitivity, political awareness, all of that. I've seen that happening to the group of artists that I work with. So you break down these language barriers, class barriers, race sort of barriers, and you really start working together. And here I believe that, really strongly believe in the act of devising, which is not just doing learning, like doing a script, but actually putting yourself out there and creating a play collaboratively. When you begin to do that, and you reach out across language, class, ethnic sort of boundaries to do that, you're really dealing with real issues. You begin to understand complexities, obstacles. You begin to understand different worldviews. And I think it's profoundly useful to artists who live in a multicultural society to educate themselves with this knowledge, not just intellectually, but knowledge in their bodies, knowledge in their imaginations, knowledge in their capacity, their interests in people. And of course, if you're doing it seriously, it takes time. So now I think Stages is a fairly balanced bilingual theatre group. We have artists who are really quite good and can work together quite well in both languages. Now I really want us to move to making it a trilingual group, but it's not easy because it's deep learning. And I mean, I feel if artists can do this and make the effort to do this, and I stress again, thanks Salman for the question, I stress that the approach should not be tentative, it mustn't be patronizing, it mustn't be, it has to move into real collaboration and real unpicking, real questions, answers, grappling with issues. If we can push our artists to reach across these barriers and engage, the artists create the product, and then we bring the audiences with us. The audiences will come. I believe that I have seen that happening. They will follow the artwork. So I think that's really important. And I feel if we support each other, if the English artists support the English language artists support the Sinhala language artists, vice versa, both of them actively support Tamil language artists, which is not happening enough at all. Our theatre company included. If we do this, we can really begin to impact on some of these deep structural barriers.
Mm-hmm. If there was something about theatre that you could change, maybe one thing perhaps, about how theatre worked here, what do you think it would be?
I'm not going to say money and funding, because I think somehow artists will always find the money to do what they need to do, or they will do what they have to do, in spite of the fact that it's arts is so poorly supported. Having said that, I must place on record that it's a real problem. What I'm going to flag instead as another structural problem, which I find really frustrating, is the support that the arts gets from other areas like academics, journalism, etc., media. Because artists are at their capacity when they, in Sri Lanka at least, I mean, all over the world, but I mean, I'm just talking about Sri Lanka. We are at our complete capacity producing artwork, right? With always a struggle. Most people are working, juggling 2 or 3 jobs. All of this is boring, but I'll just go through 2 or 3 jobs, no rehearsal space, no money, all of that. So, but we produce the artwork. The artwork is, especially if it's live art, it's performed 2, 3, 6 days, and then it dies. If it doesn't make it to the newspapers, if it doesn't make it into our departments and us, if it doesn't make it to our syllabi, if it doesn't make it, if it doesn't make it to another form, it dies. And that's what I'm really missing. And I think that's a huge problem. So we're always falling back to starting from scratch, because we create something and then it's erased, and then we're back again. So we're not really climbing on knowledge. Whatever we create is not gathered, and there's no canon. So you're rewriting the script again from scratch. And I think that structural link has a huge impact on the manner in which art grows, is absorbed, is sustained, is returned to in a country. And that's I think the real weakness. It's not a lack of artists. It's not even a lack of artistic production. It's the support of keeping those creative productions, those artistic productions alive in other forums, translating them into something else that's more permanent, that will analyze, that will that will archive, that will retain it.
What kind of permanency are you talking about? Is it you save things on video, or do you want conversations to keep running on media, or is it social media?
I mean, generally, like, just don't drop the ball.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the countries where there is a strong arts culture from the reviewers, professional reviewers, to the scholars who then take this up, to the students who'll be writing about it, to things might be discussed in a talk show. Somebody writes a book. That buzz that has to continue beyond the creation of the immediate artwork. If you don't have that, you lose memory. You're not really benefiting from what has been created. You're moving forward in strength, and that's a problem. It's memory. It's the memory of a political culture, of a creative culture. If it's not sustained, if it's not preserved, we lose it.
And when it comes to creating art, it's not just the actors and directors out there. You also have the costume designers, you have the set designers.
Of course.
And so many people behind the scenes. As someone who's an administrator also and who takes care of a company, how have you had to take care of these people in this current situation? Because none of us are working right now or creating anything. How difficult has it been?
Are you talking specifically about the COVID situation?
I'm talking specifically about this COVID situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's a huge problem. In fact, it's a huge drain on us, because on me personally, and I think even people like anybody who's running a theatre company and is also actively an artist goes through this, because at some point in your life, it just becomes your more, I think you use the word administrate, and it sort of grated on my nerves, but
Sorry.
in a way it's true. I have become more an administrator than an artist, because I feel a responsibility to look after some of the younger artists, because I've established myself, and I don't want to lose these guys, because they're brilliant, and I can see the future ahead of them. They may not be able to see it right now because it all looks so daunting. So suddenly you're kind of trying to keep 5, 10, 15, 20 people going as artists in an industry that has absolutely no support, official support, structural support for this. So that's the kind of the situation we've been in. But we found, as a theatre group, we found ourselves in a remarkably unusual place, because 8 months back, we were about to start a tour of a production for this organization called GIZ. Not 8 months back, sorry, more than a year back. We were about to start a tour of a production, and then the Easter bombings happened, and that was a huge shock. And I remember our theatre company sort of got together after this happened and kind of said, what are we doing as artists? We just keep producing these, productions, and we're sort of touring them, etc. But really, what does this all mean? And we decided that we were going to take stock of the work that we'd done up to now in order to try to redefine our future as artists. Would we continue in the theatre? Would we move out of it into something, how do we really want to be artists that were affecting change in the way that we imagined we were affecting change? Long story short, we informed GIZ that we were cancelling on the tour, and we said we want to do this instead. We're going to study the last 10 years of our work. We're going to write about our productions. We're going to research them. We're going to try to understand the effectiveness of our art, of our work as a theatre company for the last decade. GIZ responded very generously and said, okay, we'll support that. This essentially meant that for the last 8 months, and this ends with this month, we've had 18 artists supported by GIZ to research, write, etc. And they've been on monthly salaries, which is just so, it's off the wall when it comes to, the life of an artist. Most people have never, ever got a monthly salary. It's all quite exciting. So we coasted the COVID situation quite well as a theatre group, because we happened to be okay. And we had this sort of monthly allowance coming in for us to do this writing and this work on our own plays. So we were okay. Looking forward, though, I think there is a real question about how artists will sustain themselves, especially live performance artists, and people are, looking to go into video and all sorts of things, but it's just all quite unsettling and quite scary.
Do you think you could anticipate what the arts, what theatre might look like in the future, now that we have so much restriction and physical distancing? Can you anticipate what it might look like? Will there be less immersive productions, smaller shows? Do you have any inkling?
I think even if you look at Sri Lanka and you look how, we had this crazy 11 weeks of complete curfew, and people thought, everything has changed fundamentally, My God, I'll never be able to go back to my normal life, etc. the curfew's been lifted miraculously and everything is now back to normal. We have no restraints and everybody is just going back to everything, the good and the bad habits. I think that even if this lasts a year, 2 years, whatever, this situation, I think we'll probably, it's not a permanent situation. I think we'll return to live performance. What would have happened is that our audiences may have lost the interest in actually bothering to leave their homes. They may have lost the taste for live performance, and that's a possibility. Like, I mean, like the way I think during COVID, people have developed such a taste for, just watching movies online at home at their own convenience. I wonder whether people would now even be bothered to go to watch the movies. So there's that I find very disturbing, because sitting at home with your earphones on, watching a movie by yourself in the middle of the night or whatever, is not the same experience as sitting in a movie theater with 500 people watching the same movie. And the experience of sitting in watching a live performance is even more, is even deeper, because there is something about the exchange of human energies in a creative space. When there's a large group of people that are connected together in a physical space, that are connected by breath, and they're all focusing on something that is creative, that is healthy, that is questioning, there is something that happens there. It's not just about me watching the movie on my screen. It's about me being part of a greater consciousness, me being part of a community of people watching something. And the deepest experience of this is watching a live performance.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously in a live performance, the performer and the audience are also connected at all of these different levels. And I fear that people might lose their taste for that, their need for it, maybe even their respect for it. And people might make the mistake of thinking that watching a movie at home is the same as watching it in a movie theater, is the same as watching it, a live performance of it. But it's so different. It impacts us in a completely different way subconsciously. And this, I think, frightens me.
Personally, at least I can assure you, I'm going for the first live production that ever comes out. I don't even care what it is.
Yes.
I'm getting out of the house.
Absolutely, yeah.
This might be a good time to look at some questions. We have a few coming in. I think Lihan has asked how theatre education and performer training will be affected by social distancing. I think perhaps you answered that largely.
Yes,
Would
theatre education, performance training. I think it's a good time. I definitely think I'm all for theatre actors, live performance artists to begin to expand their capacities at this moment. Right? I think we will all absolutely benefit from trying to hone our skills, performing to camera, performing in, what is the dynamic between two people who are connecting through a screen? That's a completely new human, a dynamic of connection there. So let's try and understand that, and let's take advantage of this enforced situation to really unpack that as artists, because we probably wouldn't want to do that when we come out of it. So I think there's a lot to gain from that. And I would encourage artists to really push themselves. So not skirt superficially at the top, but really try to find out what this does to human relationships, connections, energies, communication, all of that. So I would say just embrace it, jump in, and try and understand this. But as soon as it's over, take that knowledge and then move out into the real world where human beings are actually connecting with each other through through the exchange of energy and in the same space.
Understood. Tracy has a question, which I'll put up now. What is your reaction to the extraordinary gazette informing us of the Committee for National Discipline, Virtue and Lawfulness?
It's awful, and it's definitely we are moving backwards, considering that the rest of the world, not all of the world, but many parts of the world seem to be actually moving forwards, unpacking some of these things. It's so tiresome to be in a country that has a leadership that seems to be pulling us back towards really dated notions of virtue. I mean, virtue. I mean, that's not even that's a British, that's a colonial. It's a really big colonial hang-up.
Yeah.
That we would take that and embrace it and make it ours, and then use it to beat our people with it. It's just ridiculous. And a national discipline, I mean, it's not possible to talk about discipline if we don't honestly talk about discipline across the board, which means integrity and accountability by people in the highest positions. You can't enforce discipline on the people of the country if the leaders of the country don't also play by the same rules. Then it's not discipline. It's authoritarianism, right? It's not. Discipline is something that comes from within. So if we're talking discipline, let's really look at adhering to discipline across the board. Financial discipline, discipline in terms of policy making, in terms of our electoral processes, all of this, our politics, our parliament. Let's look at all of that. It's tiresome to have to deal with this now, but obviously it's going to become a huge problem, and we are going to have to face it.
Yeah. A slightly lighter question from Deshan. You said you were making shorter pieces. Could you speak more to that? What sort of things were you making? Yes.
So, for instance, the monologues would be an example of a short piece. 3 to 4 page script, which would last anything between 10-20 minutes would be a short piece. It's not even the length, it's the fact that it's one person speaking, which makes it so much makes it seem so much shorter. I've also been working with my collaborator David Cottrell, who's a British artist, and I've been working in video as well, and that has also helped me sort of hone my skills as a writer, sort of dealing with more with slighter pieces, less immersive, extended pieces. So it's like it's developing a different kind of craft, a pithiness, rather than a kind of a immersiveness.
Right. That seems to be the majority of questions. So I think we can jump to our regular segment. You were talking about reading. So we'd love to hear what books you've been reading recently and what books you keep by your bed.
Okay, so honest to God, these are really the books by my bed. Okay, so I have been reading this, Primo Levi. I came to know this writer a couple of years back. He's actually he's a survivor of the Second World War. Writes the most extraordinary autobiographical narratives. So I've been reading this, and if you give me the chance, I'd like to read a small paragraph from this. It's really interesting to try and understand the depths to which human beings can descend and how they can then come out of those depths. So I've been sort of reading that. This is a book that I'm ashamed to say I haven't read, The Broken Palmyra. And I should have read it. So it was one of the first books that I decided I was going to definitely finish during this time. And it's a very difficult read. It's an extraordinary read, and it should be in our syllabi. You know, it's amazing. I'm also reading this because it's a Howard Zinn book. This is a people's history of the United States. Howard Zinn is a social activist, a philosopher, and a playwright. This is a really interesting retelling of U.S. history from the point of view of the underprivileged. So from the story of Columbus, and the sort of the initial discovery of America is told from the point of view of the First Nation people. Mm-hmm. And then he just unpacks everything. So the history is told not from a place of privilege, but from the people who suffered, because always the official records are written from a point of privilege. This next one's going to make you laugh, but I am dipping in and out to it. So it's a bit of when I'm up to here with my two preteen daughters, yeah, I return to this. And finally, this book, which I've read now a couple of times. I'm using this as sort of my anchor, trying to get me to start writing again, inspire me. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of George Orwell, and I just find this book really, it's a tiny little thing. It's so small, mm-hmm. but it's just really beautiful, and it's incredible how history circles in on itself. I can read this book, replace England with Sri Lanka, and it makes perfect sense to me. I can replace Second World War with COVID, and it makes complete sense. Right. It's the same old, and yeah. So those are the fantastic books by the side of my bed, and unfortunately, I'm reading all of them, which I really shouldn't be doing. I should be reading one immersively, but at least I'm reading all of them.
Would you read for us the extract you had for us from the first?
Yeah. So I will read you an extract from Why I Write, George Orwell, and if there is time, I'd like to read you a little bit from Primo Levi as well. So, so it's right at the beginning. George Orwell talks about the types of writers there are, the compulsions to writing. And he says, "What I have most wanted to do throughout the past 10 years is to make political writing into an art. My starting point is always a feeling of partisanship, a sense of injustice. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I am going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose. some fact to which I want to draw attention, and my initial concern is to get a hearing. But I could not do the work of writing a book or even a long magazine article if it were not also an aesthetic experience. Anyone who cares to examine my work will see that even when it is downright propaganda, it contains much that a full-time politician would consider irrelevant. I am not able, and I do not want, completely to abandon the worldview that I acquired in childhood. Looking back through the last page or two, I see that I have made it appear as though my motives in writing are wholly public-spirited. I don't want to leave that as a final impression. All writers are vain, selfish, and lazy. And at the very bottom of their motives, there lies a mystery. Writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a long bout of some painful illness. One would never undertake such a thing if one were not driven by some demon whom one can neither resist nor understand. For all one knows, that demon is simply the same instinct that makes a baby squall for attention. And yet, it is also true that one can write nothing readable unless one constantly struggles to efface one's own personality. Good prose is like a window pane. So I think there's that kind of self-deprecating sort of self-awareness, I think, is really beautiful. Do I have time to read something from Primo Levi, or are we up?
Yes, we do.
So he's talking about the night that they spent before they were all put into those, the infamous trains, the kind of the things that used to transport cattle. There were people were put into these trains and transported to Auschwitz. So he's talking about the night before this. So they were all gathered in one place and they knew they were going to be transported. And night came, and it was such a night that one knew that human eyes would not witness it and survive. Everyone felt this. Not one of the guards, neither Italian nor German, had the courage to come and see what men do when they know they have to die. All took leave from life in a manner which most suited them. Some praying, some deliberately drunk, others lustfully intoxicated for the last time. But the mothers stayed up to prepare the food for the journey with tender care and wash their children and pack the luggage. And at dawn, the barbed wire was full of children's washing hung out in the wind to dry. Nor did they forget the diapers, the toys, the cushions, and the 100 other small things which mothers remember and which children always need. Would you not do the same? If you and your child were going to be killed tomorrow, would you not give him to eat today?
That's very powerful.
Yeah, isn't it?
I mean, it is. You do the thing now. Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a nice place for us to start winding down, I think. What can we look forward to seeing from you or from stages in the future, if you have anything planned?
At the moment, we had a few things planned. And I don't think that's going to be possible because, it's physical stuff. I will also probably be working more in video, working a bit more with David, my collaborator, and sort of bringing visual artists, an international group of artists together on some sort of video work. But at the moment, Andre, I'm sorry, I can't tell you specifically what the things are because it's all kind of up in the air. I'm sorry, I wish I had a better ending to this conversation. But it's
uncertain.
Well, I'll tell you what we can look forward to. We can look forward to a 20-year anniversary, which will fall sometime in July, which is 20 years since we set up this theatre company, and it's been quite a journey. And I think at that point it'll be a good time to take stock of the last 20 years, and then also kind of look to the future. It's a great time to stop and decide what kind of artist you want to be, and how your artwork is going to evolve. And I think we'll probably take that opportunity and do that quite seriously.
And congratulations for that, for your anniversary in a month's time.
Thanks, Anil.
Thanks so much for joining us. This was a truly fascinating conversation for me. And I'm very grateful that you gave us your time for this, slightly more than an hour.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, this is fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you. You're very easy to talk to. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It was lovely having you. And everyone, thank you for joining.
Mind Adventures as well, yeah.
Yes. That's brilliant. Thank you. And we'll catch up again soon.